Hi, and welcome back to Developing Ideas for the Screen. What we're going to talk about this time in podcast number 16 is another theme. This time one of the most important ones of contemporary modern cinema, and reflected in many, many ways across the board and across all cultures, which is what makes it interesting. This particular theme, the theme of validation, has emerged over the last 20 years as one of the most driving forces in popular drama. And it's at this level we need partly to understand how it's emerged, but also the diversity of narratives that can emerge on the back of it. And just to give you some idea of the range that we're looking at here and how this theme, and the whole notion of theme of being this flexible. So if you look at what is a validation-driven thematic work in contemporary modern cinema, it will range from things like American Beauty and Raise the Red Lantern, films from two radically different cultures, through to things as diverse and yet popular and award-winning as The King's Speech and Black Swan. Now, many people at first glance will go, well, hold on a second, what's the link? How does these films actually all have the same theme? Well, the simple answer is this. As I said in previous podcasts about theme is not something that's in your face. It's not the obvious element of character or even the plotting. It's the underlying emotional engagement of the audience, the thing that builds in the audience's imagination and emotionally taps into them as the narrative unfolds. So validation has emerged, and this desire for validation has emerged as a really key part of modern contemporary life. It doesn't take much imagination to realise why. You only have to go back to maybe 3 generations, and in some countries only 1, to realise that actually many of the old certainties about a way of life have gone. So, for instance, in major industrialised nations in the last 50 years, jobs that people would have held for a lifetime have stopped being of that nature. People are shifting jobs all the time, new jobs have emerged, and things are moving at a pace. And the idea that at 20, one would go into a particular industry and stay in that industry, often in the same job for the whole of your working life, is almost nonsensical now. So people have lost that certainty. Then there's the fact that globally people are moving. The idea that one actually works and lives in the same town and space as your neighbours and family is still true in many, many parts of the world. But as the industrialised world develops, it's become ever more evident that for a tremendous number of young people, they need to move, primarily to get initially education, but that often leads to moving on also to find work. And this is likely to be true more and more as time goes by. So this dislocation from not only the certainty of work, but also the certainty of place, means you're also dislocated from community and family. The whole sense of, you knew everyone in your street, or that you grew up with all the people at school and you watched them become your friends, neighbours, partners, etc. in your late teens and 20s, is evaporating. People are moving, and as a result, all the certainties that used to hinge at the core of community and established relationships is fading away. People are having to find new ways of relating to each other in new urban-based communities. And then we come down to family. 100 years ago, in most parts of the globe, people sort of knew where they stood within their family. There were large extended families. People didn't live in small units. And there was a sense that the minute you were born, you sort of knew where you were in the family hierarchy. In the last 50 years, a lot of that has disappeared. People have moved on, they've moved out of the family home, they've set up on their own, they've moved away from immediate family and siblings. Now, clearly, in many parts of the world, this is not true. However, the sense that it's going to happen and is happening in most cultures is clearly evident. And the films about validation tap into that. And then we come down to even more particular issues. The very personal side of life. The emergence of feminism in the late 20th century meant that many people had to redraw and are still redrawing the notion of what it is to have a male and female relationship. And uncertainties around this are ever evident. And films, therefore, that address the differences between men and women or seek to reinforce particular visions of men and women are films that have deep emotional resonance. Then on the other end of the spectrum, if one looks at concepts of nation, for many people in the last 50 years, the building of a new nation and a new national identity has been the result of civil wars, revolution and rebellion. But for many, many people across the globe, the notion that you belong to a nation and that the nation is your identifier has started to evaporate. Within Europe, the emergence of the European Union and the concept of being European and travelling and working everywhere has become ever more evident. Within North America, the migration across borders has meant many, many people in the Americas now see themselves as actually becoming American in a broader sense. And within Africa, the migrations across borders through poverty, war, etc., mean that people are no longer thinking in terms of borders that were laid down over 100 years ago, but much more about their own tribal allegiance or where they've actually just physically ended up. So in this sense, nationhood is also on the move and lacks a certainty that it once had for people. Now you put all this together and you realise that actually for most human beings there are very few things that they now can use as significant identifiers. This means the question of who are you, where do you belong, how do you value yourself in modern life comes very much to the forefront of people's need. And this is where narratives about validation step in. They engage with these very broad and very personal questions about who are you as a human being, where do you belong, who do you belong with, how do you value yourself in the modern age? Is this through money? Is it through relationships? Is it because you have a status in a particular culture or a particular community? And what are these new status positions? Narratives that explore this, seek to engage with it, look to say this is one way of addressing how valid you are as a human being, become ever more evident. And the films that stand out in this sense tend to be films that have tragic characterization at their core, where people are seen at one level to be failing at the beginning of the film, to not fit in, to not belong, to not have a place in the society, to the point where they acquire that place or they achieve their goal, even if it might be at a tragic cost. These are the narratives that are drawing people into the cinema and are actually ensuring that audiences globally, no matter what culture they come from, are drawing very strong emotional bonds and having a sense that by watching these narratives, they belong, they can draw some sense of identity from them. So, for instance, on the one hand, you have the King's Speech, where you have a king who cannot fulfill his function because he can't speak, and a sort of failed actor who's claiming to be a great voice coach, who ultimately, between the two of them, they get to the point where the king can speak and the claims of the failed actor are validated. On the other side of the question, something like Black Swan, where you have a ballerina who wants to be the great star and is seen not to have that quality, acquires that quality by the end of the film at an enormous cost. And this is the point. Theme is not about how you, the creator of the work, want to take your journey for the central character to its conclusion. It's more about the relationship of how the audience relates to that character's journey. This is the point. Theme is about emotion. It rests underneath all the plotting, all the characterization. So, for instance, something like The Full Monty, a relatively low-budget film, and until relatively recently, one of the top grossing films of all time, was in fact about a bunch of failed, unemployed, middle-aged men who, if you walked into a room and said, we're going to make a film about unemployed steelworkers in their 30s and 40s who go out and become strippers, people would have laughed you out of the room as a commercial proposition. Clearly the comedy helped, but it was also about the fact that these men were struggling to find a new identity in a post-industrial age. That spoke to a lot of people. Yes, it was funny, but emotionally people recognized underneath it all there was something very true about the nature of that story. And even if one transposes that to somewhere so alien as to an historical China in something like Raise the Red Lantern, where a young woman is basically told she's going to marry and become the third, fourth wife of a rich man and live in an enclosure where she has no outside identity and she has to struggle to maintain a position as the most important wife, and in doing that goes to the extent of leading to the death of another wife. Clearly this is tragic, but essentially the emotional thing about a young woman actually struggling to find her place in a society where she has very little power except her own status as a sexual object and as the partner of a powerful man, then in that context many women would see that this is a contemporary issue, even though it's set in a completely non-contemporary setting. And it's to understand the power of theme is to recognise that validation at that level really, really does work, and is a very good example of how emotion works in lots of different ways, but is focused really, really well at a thematic level.